So I want to point to another possibility today and ask you to take a look at this possibility, because I'm going to assume that you are far enough along in this process that you understand that what we're up to here is self-realization. I'm assuming that you're long enough into this process now that I'm assuming that you understand that the real purpose of meditation is to make contact with the truth, that the real purpose of meditation is to experience your true nature. Why? Because the experience of your true nature in and of itself resolves all psychological and emotional suffering. Right? I was watching a webinar today that I had to take in order to maintain my license as a psychologist. And they were talking about depression and bipolar illness. And they were talking about the treatment, the symptoms of it, the treatment of it, and all that, right? And throughout the entire time, this was a 6-hour class, right? And it's supposed to be presenting you with an overview of the understandings that we have as psychologists about depression and bipolar illness, right? And in all 6 hours, they talked about medications, they talked about brain chemistry, they talked about environmental influences, they talked about the reasons for depression and all of these mental disturbances. And the thing that they focused on that is a consistent understanding as the cause of mental illness, right? The consistent understanding as the cause of mental illness by contemporary psychology, right, is difficulties in relationship, a loneliness, isolation, right? Conflict in important relationships in your life, difficulties in terms of the roles you play in the world, losing your job, right? That's difficulties in the roles that you play in the world. The one thing they never mentioned at all is identity. Almost as if it doesn't exist. Almost as if it doesn't exist. And that just goes to show you that even the people who are the specialists, the professionals who are supposed to understand human behavior and human psychology and supposed to be able to successfully treat the conditions that come from the disturbances to psychology and human behavior, even these professionals completely ignore the role of identity. Completely ignore the role of identity in regard to that. Right? And it doesn't take much. If you start to get involved with these teachings and practices, it doesn't take much for you to begin to understand and see how it is the case that identity is the true source of suffering. Modern psychology deals with reducing symptoms. It has to do with reducing symptoms, changing the brain chemistry, right, to increase the serotonin in the brain, for example, as a way of diminishing the symptom of depression, okay? The problem with that is if we treat it backwards, this is treating it backwards. We're treating the effect of something. That's treating it backwards. We're treating the effect of something, not the cause of what that effect is, right? So if we're treating the effect of something and we use medication to change the brain chemistry, and we trick the brain into believing that everything is okay. That's what you're doing when you change the brain chemistry, when you increase the serotonin reuptake in the brain, right? You're cheating the brain, or you're tricking the brain into thinking everything's fine with the chemistry, right? The problem with that is there's no attention being given to the cause. None at all. No attention being given to the cause. And then they talk about the fact that after you're on the medication for a while, you know, does it work or does it not work? And if it does work, how long does it work? So talk about remission and so forth, right? Because the thing that turns out to be the case that continues to get ignored, right, is that if you keep taking the medication over time, it loses its effect. Why? Because the problem is still operating. That's why it loses its effect, right? Yeah. And if you stop taking the medication, it loses its effect because your brain is responding to your identity. That's the condition your brain chemistry is responding to your identity. Your brain will organize itself according to your identity, right? So if your identity is you take yourself to be something that doesn't exist, that's neurosis. Already neurosis. That's already mental illness, taking yourself to be something that doesn't exist, right? So if we're going to look at the real cause, and the real cause is identity confusion, right? Then the question becomes, how do you get out of the identity confusion, right? We're not going to take medication to change the brain chemistry and try and trick the brain into being okay. We're going to start paying attention to the source of the symptoms. Start paying attention to the cause of the disturbance, which is an identity issue, okay? But then the next thing that comes up is, oh, if it's an identity issue, how is that so? Well, it's an identity issue because we, as human beings, in order to participate in life as we know it, in order to participate in a human life, right, we have to play by the rules. And the rules are, you take yourself to be a physical body, and you take yourself to be a personality, and you live in time and space, right? Those are the rules of the game, right? Those are the rules you have to play by in order to play the game of human life, right? And you have to take yourself to be a separate self, right? Once I'm a separate self, then we can have a relationship, you see, like that. Right? So, but if you're playing by those rules, you're setting yourself up for suffering because what the rules are that you're playing by are not consistent with reality. The rules you're playing by are not consistent with the truth. The truth is you are not a separate self. Truth is your real identity is consciousness itself, and the consciousness that you are is not separate from anything. That's called non-duality, okay? But then, as some of you have said to me, how the hell do I stop being who I take myself to be? How do I get out of this? I understand what you're saying, right? But it's got my attention so consistently that I keep living my life as that. How do I get out of this? Ramana Maharshi was considered to be one of the greatest non-dual teachers of our time, right? When he had people come and sit with him, right? They would ask him, you know, can you teach us? Can you help us? You know, we're stuck in this identity here. Can you help us get out of it because you're free from it, right? So what did he say? He said, the highest teaching I can give you is silence. The highest teaching I can give you is silence. Right? Why? It's what you said.
Me?
No, it's what Brian said earlier. Why is silence the highest teaching?
Because there's nothing to be done.
Because in silence you see your true self.
Not necessarily, but the possibility of it is way higher. Why? Because silence is non-conceptual, isn't it? Silence is non-conceptual. It's not language. It's not using words to replace experiences anymore in silence. It's direct. So when people came and sat with Ramana Maharshi, some of them woke up and began to experience their true nature just by being in his presence, right? Just by being in his presence and sitting with him in silence. Because when they were sitting with him in silence and looking at him, he was expressing a direct relationship with reality. If you look at some of the old movies of Ramana Maharshi sitting, right, and you look at his face, he never blinked his eyes. He never blinked his eyes. And he was in relationship to something all the time. So if you were sitting in front of him, his eyes were in relationship to something all the time. And by sitting with him, you could come into that channel. Do you understand? You could come into that channel. And some people would wake up with him. But some people wouldn't wake up like that. And so the people that wouldn't wake up like that, they said, can you teach us? Can you give us a technique? Can you give us some practice? Can you tell us something that we can do that would help us to be awake? So Ramana Maharshi said, okay, I'm going to give you something you could do. And he called it self-inquiry. Self-inquiry. What is self-inquiry? Well, he said, the practice of self-inquiry, it's a practice, just like resting as awareness for brief moments. It's a practice, right? So what is the practice of self-inquiry? For you people who are struggling with escaping from the identity that's running your life, right? What is self-inquiry? It means as many times as you can remember, especially during the times in your life when you're suffering, right? Take a look and ask yourself the question, who am I? That's inquiring into your true nature, right? Self-inquiry, you're inquiring into your true nature. Ask yourself, who am I? But the power of self-inquiry is not asking a question to get an answer. The power of self-inquiry is in the looking. The power of self-inquiry is in the looking. So if you practice self-inquiry, you're asking, who am I? And when you ask the question, who am I, you don't look for an answer from your mind. That would be the ordinary way of asking about identity, right? If I ask you who you are, you're going to tell me what you think, right? That's the ordinary way of asking about identity. Self-inquiry is not asking for an answer. Self-inquiry is asking the question, who am I? And then looking to see what the answer is as an experience you're having. You see? Not looking to see what the mind has to say about it, right? But asking, who am I? And then when you ask the question, who am I? Allow yourself to look and see what the answer is. See what the answer is. Not have the answer appear in thought, but actually see what the answer is. Seeing what the answer is allows you to make the connection, to see. You know, in the old days, they would call people who are awake seers. You ever hear that? They would call them seers, right? Instead of thinkers. Seers instead of thinkers. I see how things are instead of I think about how things are. When you contemplate, your contemplation is looking at something that you're contemplating. If I want to contemplate the nature of my true identity, right? I'm looking at it, and I'm allowing myself to become familiar with it directly by looking at it. You know, there was a guy out on the West Coast that I spent some time with, that he was kind of a teacher. And his way of talking about self-inquiry is he would just say, look at yourself. That's how he talked about it. Just look at yourself. He created a website called Just One Look. Look at yourself. His videos are still out there on YouTube. His name was John Sherman. The reason he was of interest to me was because he was from the federal prison system. He served 35 years in prison, right? He became a non-dual teacher, right? He woke up in prison, right? So I was interested in him. I actually went out to California to meet this guy and spend some time with him, right? And he was teaching self-inquiry. Look at yourself, right? So he's passed away now, but his videos are still on YouTube if you want to check him out. His name was John Sherman, right? When him and I were talking at some point, and we were talking about how to help people wake up, at one point I said to him, one of the things I'm noticing out of my own process here is that it has a lot to do with attention. Has a lot to do with attention. Has a lot to do with being aware of your attention and noticing where your attention is at. Has a lot to do with that. Right? And he said, oh, can I take that idea that you just talked about and write a book about it? Is it okay with you? So I said, go ahead. So he did write a book about attention. Right? But you know, if you've been practicing meditation, you understand that attention is critical. You can't meditate until you're able to pay attention consistently for a specific period of time, right? And the idea of practicing and cultivating and developing your ability to pay attention is so that you can eventually be paying attention consistently. If you're paying attention consistently, you're awake. If you're paying attention consistently, you're awake, because the awake state of consciousness is attentive. The awake state of consciousness is attentive. The asleep state of consciousness, right, is not attentive. It's having attention being taken by thinking. It's not attentive. It's having the attention being taken by thinking. So you're not choosing to have your attention be taken by thinking. It just is. And so one of the things you discover when you attempt to practice meditation is your attention is not yours. You can't be responsible for your attention because it's not yours. You unwittingly have given it away and you didn't even know. That's how people sell you shit. Right? When you're watching TV, if you watch TV commercials, right? I watch TV commercials not because I enjoy watching TV commercials per se, but I enjoy looking to see the psychology that they're using. Right? They use psychology in TV commercials, and what's the most important thing that they're attempting to do?
Get you to buy something.
How are they going to do that?
Convince you you need it. Convince you that they're.
But how are they going to do that?
They either make you fearful or
But how are they going to do that?
they get your attention.
Yeah, that's the only thing they're attempting to do.
Get your
Get your
attention.
attention.
Look at the Liberty commercials for car insurance, right? Is what goes on in those commercials have anything to do with car insurance? Nothing.
Comedy.
Nothing. All they want you to do is to look, and once they have your attention, at the end of the commercial, they put the Liberty symbol on there and play the music. That's all they want. Just remember the word liberty and remember the music. That's all they want, to get your attention. Right? So it's the same way in your life. As you go through your life, right, you think you're giving your attention, but your attention's being taken. What's it being taken by? It's been being taken by anything that you see that interests you, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's being taken by anything that you see that interests you. And what interests you? The things that are going to provide comfort and pleasure, right? Or the things that are going to help you avoid being uncomfortable and suffering. That's what interests you. So that's what you're paying attention to all the time. This is called intentional living, right? This is called instead of waiting for the right thing to happen, become the cause of the right thing. Instead of waiting for the right thing to happen, become the cause of the right thing to happen. You don't have to accept anything. You know that. That's why you reject so many things. Right? If you had to accept everything and you understood that acceptance was equal to your well-being, you would practice acceptance. But you don't practice acceptance. You practice rejecting. See, that's the problem with the idea of giving that as a solution to say, oh, practice accepting the way things are. Why wouldn't that be a good solution?
Because it's doing.
I thought it was a good solution.
The reason it's not a good solution is because you can't. That's why you can't. Try it. If you think I'm wrong, try it. Try to practice accepting things the way they are. Who is acceptance challenging for? You. Who you take yourself to be doesn't accept things. Why? Because it's always relating to the thought process, and the thought process is judging and evaluating everything all the time. And it won't allow you to accept things that are not consistent with what you believe should be happening. That's what's going on. Right? So acceptance is the key, but you can't do it.
Well, I thought.
You can't do it as who you take yourself to be. The only way you can do it is to be what you actually are. And when you're being what you actually are, acceptance is your nature. It's not something you're doing, it's a state of being. Acceptance is not a do, it's a be. It's a state of being.